The hunters drew their weapons and rushed Hiccup and Stoic, who instantly made a break for the exit, arrows flying towards them, and one lucky one embedded itself into Hiccup's back, making him gasp in shock and pain before falling over and letting darkness take him as he slipped from consciousness. Hiccup! Stoic screamed in horror as blood started to ooze out of his son's back, his eyes glazing over as the red liquid started to form a puddle around him, and Viggo gestured for his men to stop. "It is done," he muttered as Stoic's breath quickened and he kneeled down next to Hiccup, gently picking him up and looking at him in despair. Old memories of when he was just a small child flooded Stoic's mind as Hiccup coughed up a bit of blood. No. He choked as he brushed Hiccup's bangs out of his face and he weakly lifted up his head. "Dad!" Hiccup barely whispered as the dragons and riders started to wake up and they gasped in horror. "Hiccup!" Winter yelped as she flew over to Hiccup and Stoic. Hey Winter!" Hiccup muttered as she stared at him with her snowy eyes, which were now filled with tears. "Hiccup!" Valka, Astrid, and Brenna muttered at almost the exact same time as the dragons stared sadly, except for Toothless, who turned to the hunters and snarled at them, pure rage almost shaking his body as he crept towards Viggo, his scales beginning to glow blue, making all the onlookers stare in shock as he shot the most powerful blast he had ever shot, right at Viggo's throat. The sight afterwards was anything but pretty. Shocked parents shielded their children's eyes and even the twins and Snotlout gagged at the sight. But Toothless didn't care, he just looked at the other hunters with a brutal intention on kill, which made them scatter like crazy, but a few unfortunate ones did feel the wrath of the Night Fury. He pounced on them, ripped them limb from limb, burning them, scraping them, making them almost unrecognizable. But his bloodlust, the urge to kill these awful men, was too strong for him to have any moral at the moment. When all the hunters were finally either dead or ran away, Sky warily walked up to him. "Toothless?" she asked slowly as Toothless took a few deep breaths before realizing what he had done. He gave her a panicked look before staring up at the crowd of horrified Vikings, and then at Hiccup, whose eyes were now closed and he was being cradled gently by Stoic, who occasionally wiped tears from his own eyes as he cupped the still teen's cheek gently. "Hiccup, my little boy." Stoic trailed off as some more tears splashed down his face. That was a horrifying indication for Toothless. He quickly looked at Sky before shaking his head. "No," he said quietly as Sky sadly nodded. "When you were on that rampage, Hiccup bled out." He sighed as Winter licked Hiccup's hand sadly as tears flowed from her eyes. "This can't be happening. This just can't be happening." Brenna muttered as she and Astrid looked at each other sadly, and Valka rested her head on Stoic's shoulder and she finally took off her helmet, making Stoic gasp. "I'm not who you should be worrying about," she muttered as her huge teal eyes landed on Hiccup, who was motionless, a little bit of blood still flowing from his wound, but he was gone. The onlookers watched, teary-eyed as Toothless slowly crept towards Hiccup, the smell of metallic blood filling his nostrils, making him grimace. "Hiccup!" Toothless muttered as he nuzzled Hiccup gently on the cheek. He was freezing and his skin was pasty. Stoic was about to push Toothless back, to scream at him for ever taking him away, but he stopped. Toothless' huge grass-green eyes locked with Stoic's as he whimpered sadly, those green eyes holding more emotions than Stoic ever thought possible for a dragon: grief, anguish, a hint of denial. You were the best friend he ever had, weren't you?" he asked quietly as Toothless nodded and looked back down at Hiccup. "I cared about him more than anyone will ever know." Toothless sighed as Snowflake, who had been watching the whole scene sadly, realized something and she smiled widely. "I think I might actually know a way to bring him back," she said as everyone's head snapped towards her and Winter jumped up in excitement. "Really, Snowflake? Hiccup can come back?" Winter exclaimed in delight as a grin slowly started to make its way across Toothless' face as well. "What the hell are you waiting for? Do it!" Toothless chirped as Snowflake rubbed her arm nervously. "Well, the only problem is, I don't know what will happen to him. Something will change, internally or externally, to save his life. It could be something as small as his freckles disappearing to something as big as him losing his ability to breathe, or his heart not working right," she said warily as Stoic stood up, holding Hiccup as he made his way over to her. "I am willing to take that chance. Even if he's only alive for a couple more minutes. I to tell him something." he said as Snowflake nodded and took Hiccup, her blue dress starting to get a bit red as Hiccup's wound touched her clothes. I need someone to help me, she said, scanning the crowd and noticing Astrid and Brenna's hands shooting up at the same time. Okay. Blondie, I need you to pin him down. I know it might sound weird but trust me, you need to. And you, Sky's rider, you need to get me some water and a cloth. Snowflake commanded as Astrid warily sat on top of Hiccup, using her knees to pin his arms down as Brenna raced from the scene, searching the village for a bucket of water. Snowflake then turned to Hiccup and carefully placed a hand on his heart before muttering something under her breath, making Hiccup's lifeless body twitch. The crowd held their breaths as Hiccup started to thrash around violently, making Astrid flinch back as Brenna came running in with a bucket of water and handed it to Snowflake, and she quickly threw it on Hiccup's head, making him snap awake. Ah! He yelped before shaking his head and looking around in shock. Astrid? He asked quietly as everyone stared at him in shock. Well, his eyes in shock. They were a dragon's eyes. His pupils had turned to slits and his irises filled the whites of his eyes. Then, Astrid did something that threw everyone off guard. She punched him on the shoulder. That's for scaring me, she snapped as Hiccup moaned in pain before she, again, shocked everyone, by pulling Hiccup into a deep kiss. What? Brenna trailed off in shock, Hiccup and Astrid. I thought we had something, she muttered before turning away sadly, and Sky nuzzled her. Hey, it's okay, Sky assured as Hiccup propped himself onto his elbows and continued the kiss with Astrid, but she pulled away after about another 2 seconds. He blinked a couple of times before smiling. Hiccup! Winter exclaimed as she plopped herself on his chest, making him wheeze a bit as the crowd laughed and she covered him with kisses. Hey sweetie, he said as Winter nuzzled him a bit more. Oh son, Valka muttered as she bent down and hugged him, shocking him a bit before he shrugged and leaned in before she backed away as Stoic walked up to him and fell to his knees as Hiccup sat up and sighed. I know Dad, I should have come back, I'm an embarrassment to the tribe and you. Hiccup. Stoic cut him off as everyone stared at them, expectantly waiting for Stoic's next few words. You make me proud to call you my son. You are the bravest, strongest, most amazing person on Berk. And I want you to know that until the end of time. He muttered as Hiccup's jaw dropped and a little tear fell down his cheek as Stoic leaned in and hugged him, making him gasp, before a big grin spread across his face and he hugged him back. Thanks Dad. Hiccup thanked as Toothless smirked and licked his face, making Hiccup grimace and pull away. Well, you sure know how to ruin a moment, Tooth, he said as everyone chuckled and Brenna looked around in confusion. Where's Talon? She asked as everyone went silent and they looked around. She then warily stared in the direction of the bloody mess and noticed something, a little hand that was laying in a pile of blood, a hand with a little claw on was finger. Talon. She choked before looking over at Toothless, whose jaw dropped as her shocked look turned into one of hate and disgust. Why you killed him? She snarled as she lunged at Toothless, but Sky used her tail to hold her back. Brenna, he thought Talon was a hunter, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm sorry. Sky sighed as she held Brenna back, who was going absolutely crazy. You bastard. You killed an innocent person who was trying to help us. Fuck you. Brenna snarled as Toothless whimpered and Hiccup stepped in front of him protectively. Wasn't that guy a hunter? A voice shouted from the crowd. It was Snotlout. Snotlout's dead. Astrid whispered to Hiccup as he nodded in agreement before looking down at the hand with a pitiful expression on his face. Sure, he and Astrid weren't very fond of Talon, but they still couldn't help but feel bad. He changed. I know it. And now he's. She trailed off as a sob got stuck in her throat and she looked down, squeezing her eyes shut so no tears would fall out before quickly running out, Sky following close behind. Brenna. Wait. She called after her as Hiccup sighed and he looked up at Astrid. I'll get her. She sighed, but then Valka pushed her back lightly and gave her a small smile. Let me take this one, you can stay with Hiccup. Valka assured as Astrid nodded and she ran out. Hiccup, so you are the rider? Stoic asked to break the silence between them. Yeah. He said sheepishly as Astrid walked next to him. And you? Stoic trailed off as Astrid whistled for Stormfly to come over, which she did. I rescued Stormfly from dragon training. I then heard you and Johan talking when he gave you some information on the rider. I wanted to know who it was, and lo and behold, Hiccup was him. She explained as Stoic put an arm around Hiccup's shoulder and smiled. Son, we have a lot to catch up on, he said as Hiccup smiled back and Winter perched herself on his shoulder. Yeah. We're all okay, she exclaimed, making Hiccup and Toothless laugh as they walked back towards their house, making the crowd applaud like crazy. Welcome home, son, Stoic muttered as Winter licked Hiccup's ear and he smiled. Well, it's good to be back. Underscore 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 underscore. In the middle of the forest, Talon laid on the ground, unmoving, but he was taking in shallow breaths, his stump for a hand at his side as his eyes opened a tiny bit and he moaned in pain before using his good hand to drag himself across the lumpy forest floor. He soon gave up and curled into a ball. I wonder if Brenner's worried about me, he thought before his eyes slid close, but unknown to him, someone was watching him from behind the trees, a confused look plastered on his face as he ran up to Talon. Are you all right? He asked, and all Talon could manage was a groan, and the man stared at him in concern, his amber eyes growing wide as he noticed the lack of hand on his left arm. Oh no. Trappers. Get over here. He barked as a few other men ran from the trees and stood in front of him. Get him to the ship and fast. He'll bleed out if he stays here, the man commanded as the trappers nodded, but one stayed back. But what about the rider? Drago is going to actually kill you if you show up empty-handed, he said as the first man shook his head. Just tell him we didn't have any luck. We can catch a few dragons on our way back to the base and that'll be that. He trusts me, I am the greatest dragon trapper alive, the man boasted before they walked back into the trees and headed towards a natural dock not too far away where a little boat was waiting, Talon's stump being tended to attentively, and he groaned in pain. It's okay, lad. What's your name? The man asked, trying to make conversation to distract Talon from the awful pain. T. Talon, he said in a strained voice as some men wrapped the stump in gauze. Strange name. So, how'd you get your hand chopped off? He asked as Talon attempted to sit up. A Night Fury ripped it off in a fit of rage. He sputtered as all their jaws dropped and he looked at the man. Who are you? Where am I? He asked as the man held out his hand. I'm Eret, son of Eret, finest dragon trapper alive. Wait, so was it before or after you saved Winter that you almost lost your foot? Stoic said as Hiccup took a sip and his drink and rubbed the back of his neck. After, jumping off a 500-foot cliff isn't the most fun thing in the world, might I add, he said with a small grin as Valka yawned and walked downstairs. You two are still up? She asked before stretching and sitting down next to Hiccup. Yeah, Hiccup replied before he yawned a bit, making Stoic smile. We were just catching up a bit, he said as Valka perked up in interest. Yoo-hoo, I never heard any of the stories he went on either, she said as Hiccup smiled and shrugged. Well, I was just telling Dad about the time a southern fury broke into Toothless and Sky's cave while they were out, Hiccup said as Winter sleepily opened her eyes and yawned as she crawled out of Sky's grasp and away from the warm fireplace, making her roll over and cuddle into Toothless, who smiles in his sleep and leaned in closer to her. Hiccup. When can I see my mommy and daddy again? She asked quietly as Hiccup's eyes widened in panic. Dusk and Tempest. Oh no, they are gonna blow up at Toothless, he muttered as he looked at Stoic and Valka, who were both giving him a confused look. We have to get her back to her parents. I'll be right back, I swear, Hiccup assured as he whistled for Toothless and Sky, who groaned and woke up, and Hiccup put on his chest plate and threw his bow over his shoulder and grabbed the quiver. Wait. She's not their hatchling, Valka asked in shock as Toothless and Sky's cheeks burned bright red, and Hiccup laughed before shaking his head. No. Toothless and her are siblings, he said before hopping onto Toothless's back, and Toothless nudged the door open and looked back in to see Sky biting her lip nervously. Come on, Sky. We need to get Winter back, Toothless said as she shook her head. Sorry, Brenna's upstairs sleeping and I really don't want to just leave her here, she apologized as Hiccup and Toothless looked at each other before both shrugging. Okay, then I'll see you guys tomorrow, Hiccup said as he waved to them and flew out the door quickly, Winter flying up to them and landing on Hiccup's shoulder. This may sound strange, but I don't want him to be gone for even a second more, Stoic admitted as Valka put a loving hand on his back. Well, you lost him once and you don't want to lose him again, she said as she looked out the window and at the starry night sky. But he has Toothless. A dragon will always protect its rider no matter what, she assured as Stoic sighed and nodded. Underscore 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 underscore. You did what? Tempest snarled as Toothless took a step back and Hiccup put a gentle hand on his bow, just in case. Daddy, please don't yell at them, Winter begged as Dusk ushered her away. You, don't talk. We'll think of a punishment for you sneaking away later, she said angrily before turning back to Hiccup and Toothless. I knew it. I knew that bringing that boy back was going to be nothing but trouble. That boy ruined everything in our peaceful lives, Tempest growled as Toothless glared at him back. Hiccup is my best friend. Don't you dare say that. He made our boring lives interesting, Toothless barked as Tempest and Dusk both backed up a bit in shock. He ruined our lives. No. You just hate anything I like because you can't get over Fireheart, he roared as the cave went silent. They never spoke about the destroyed egg, mostly because it was a very sensitive topic for all of them. Grayscale, Tempest said as Toothless' eyes turned to huge saucers. Dad, I. Get out of here, Tempest said quietly as Toothless started to slowly walk towards him. I said leave, he roared as Toothless whimpered and flew out. Winter tried to follow but Dusk held her back and sobbed into her side. Mommy, why does Daddy hate Hiccup? She asked quietly as Dusk wiped her eyes and sighed. Because he's too much like your brother, she sighed before Winter gasped and flew out as fast as she could, tears forming in her eyes as she did so. Toothless is awesome. And so is Hiccup, she whimpered before landing on Hiccup's shoulder and crying into his hair. It's okay Winter, we don't have to stay here. We can go back to Berk. They actually like us over there, Hiccup assured as Winter smiled and slowly fell asleep. Underscore 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 underscore. Talon looked around nervously. Their tiny ship pulled into a gigantic armada and docked near the largest ship. Oh! It's Irette! Irette yelled as a part of the ship opened up and a few more trappers ran out and Irette threw a few ropes as they pulled them onto the ship and the door closed behind them with a bang. Talon flinched and looked around the gigantic ship. It kind of reminded him of the hunter's base. Dragons in cages were everywhere, but they were wearing armor instead of being pampered because of their soft hide, or being threatened into giving them things like spines and acid. I just made that up for Changedoings ___. Where are the dragons? One of the trappers asked as he inspected the ship. We didn't catch any. We picked up Talon over here on Berk after he was attacked by a night fury. Poor lad had his head bitten off by the beast, Irette explained as he gestured for Talon to step forwards, which he cautiously did. Hello sir, he stuttered as the trapper glared at him before walking away. Irette then grabbed his good arm and led him through the giant ship. Where are we going? Talon asked nervously as they walked towards a staircase, a bit of sunlight coming through the opening at the top. We're going to see the boss. His name is Drago Bloodfist. Just follow my lead, he's not the most kind man in the world, Irette said as they walked up the staircase and onto the deck of a ship, where a large man with a cape stood at the hull, staring down into the bubbling ocean. "Drago!" Eret exclaimed as he winked, and the man turned around, his cold grey teal eyes making Talon gulp. "Did you find the rider?" he asked coolly as he looked at Talon, who squeaked nervously. "No sir, we found him in the woods on the island of Berk. Apparently he was attacked by a night fury and his hand was torn off," Eret explained as a small smile curled at Drago's lips. "Heh, small world," he muttered before unhooking his metal armor on his arm, except it wasn't armor, it was a prosthetic. Drago then looked back at Eret and his expression became stoic again. "How many dragons did you get on your way back?" he asked as Eret gulped nervously. "Well, Drago, we were mostly tending to Talon's arm on the way back. And we wanted to focus only on finding the rider before we found him, yes sir," he stuttered as Drago's expression darkened. "So you don't have any dragons?" he asked as Eret shook his head and laughed nervously. "Well, there was a good reason. I don't give a damn about your excuses. You didn't do your job." Drago snarled before grabbing Eret by the throat and throwing him onto the ground harshly, making Talon wince. "Get me the brand," he commanded as Eret's eyes widened in fear. "No, Drago, I'm your top trapper. Give me a pass, just this once and I'll get twice the amount of dragons I usually get in one trip," Eret begged as a trapper ran back with a bright orange brand and handed it to Drago. "This is your pass. And I will be far less understanding in the future. Do you hear me?" he growled as Eret nodded weakly and Drago pressed the brand onto his chest, making him scream in pain. Talon /nose wrinkled at the smell of burning flesh and he quickly ran over to the side of the boat to vomit. "I wish Jade or Brenna was here right now," he moaned before weakly walking back over to Eret and Drago. "Come with me, we'll get you a prosthetic hand and a cabin in one of the ships," Drago said as he put an arm around Talon's shoulder and walked back down the staircase with him. "Is Eret going to be alright?" Talon asked nervously. "He'll be fine. I just hate excuses. Especially from cocky punks like him," Drago muttered as Talon shot him a weak glare. "Eret saved my life," he said quietly with a clear undertone of anger. "Backsassing me huh? Where are you originally from?" Drago asked as Talon bit his lip. "I've worked for the Dragon Hunters for as long as I can remember. They took me in after I was abducted by a dragon when I was a baby. They shot it down and tried to find my parents, but after about 6 months of trying, they just kinda gave up," Talon admitted as Drago's small smirk disappeared and they now started to move very quickly. "Drago! I got the hand!" a trapper exclaimed as Drago grabbed it and pushed him out of the way roughly. "Drago! Can you slow down?" "No. We're here," he said as he opened up the door to a small cabin, which had a few candles placed around it, a desk with notebooks and pencils, and a bed. Drago pushed Talon inside and gave him the hand before quickly closing the door and speed walking back to his own cabin, slamming the door behind him. He took a few deep breaths before slowly walking over to his desk and warily pulling open a drawer, which had a folded painting in it. He carefully unfolded it and laid it down on his bed in shock. It was a family portrait. Drago, about 15 or 16 years younger, stood behind a woman with dark brown hair and bright blue eyes. He was looking down at her and smiling. This picture was definitely painted before Drago changed into a crazed madman. He leaned in closer and squinted. In the woman's arms was a little baby boy with a big smile on his face. He had a tuft of black hair on his tiny head and bright bluish teal eyes. "Vali," he muttered as he shook his head and left the room, leaving the picture out. "Just imagine the screen fading into Vali's face. It makes sense in my head, okay," winking and laughing smiley. Dragons flew around a village as people rushed outside and grabbed their weapons, ready to fight the invaders. Inside a certain house, Drago readied himself for battle next to the same woman from the picture. "How many dragon do you think we'll kill tonight?" the woman asked as Drago chuckled. "As many as we can, Helivi." "Well, I'll get 5 more than you can," he said with a grin as the woman hit him in annoyance before grabbing her axe. "Wait, we can't forget to say goodbye to Vali," she said before running upstairs, Drago hot on her heels as they ran into a little nursery, where Vali was fast asleep in his crib. See you in a few hours, Vali. Drago whispered as Halevi gave the baby a small kiss on the forehead before running outside. They both gasped as soon as they set foot outdoors. This was a record amount of dragons for a raid. There were at least 250 against their tiny town of 100. Fight to Valhalla? Drago asked as Halevi grinned. Well, we are Bloodvists now, aren't we? She asked, joking before they both ran out into the fight, weapons raised. About 15 minutes later almost the entire town was on fire. It was complete mayhem. Drago occasionally glanced back at the house just to make sure Vali was okay. Ah! A scream echoed as Drago instantly whipped around to see Halevi pinned down by a snaffle fang. Halevi, no! He screamed before sprinting as fast as he could in her direction, all that mattered as getting to her. Drago! She screamed before the dragon fired a fatal blast and flew away, making Drago take a few quick breaths and run over in disbelief. Halevi, no, you can't. He choked before grasping one of her hands with both of his. No! He screamed in agony before hearing another scream, a baby's scream. Drago looked up and saw a monstrous nightmare break into his house and crawl into Vali's nursery. I'm not losing him too. He snarled before booking it towards the house and running upstairs, startling the nightmare into grabbing the baby and attempting to take off, but Drago grabbed it just in time and yanked back its tail. He tried to reach before Vali, but the dragon whipped around and made a blind bite before turning around and flying out as fast as possible, Vali in its talons. Ah! Drago screamed, his entire arm was gone, all the way up to the shoulder. Blood spewed out of the wound and he fell to the ground in pain, then, blacked out. Rain drizzled from the grey sky softly as Hiccup, Toothless, and Winter landed on a sea stack. Toothless draped a wing over Hiccup and Winter while Hiccup grabbed a few sticks, which Winter lit up. I'm so sorry, Toothless. Hiccup said, breaking the once tense silence between them. My dad is just infuriating sometimes. He doesn't care about any dragon but himself. Toothless snapped as Winter was about to say something, but then stepped back. Yeah, I know the feeling. I thought my dad couldn't give a damn about me. But then, when he saved me from Vigo, I realized, he did care about me. A lot. Tempest loves you, trust me. He just has a lousy way of showing it. Hiccup assured as Toothless sighed and gestured to Winter. But he makes her believe that he loves her. And all my other siblings. But of course, I'm the oldest. So I need to carry on his legacy. Pfft, why would anyone want to be as stubborn, angry, and stoic as him? Toothless exclaimed angrily as Hiccup put a hand on his muzzle. I've been there, believe me. He said as Toothless sighed and nuzzled him. Hiccup. Shouldn't we go back to Berk? Your mommy and daddy are probably worried about you. Winter said as Hiccup patted her head. They know I'm here, I'm fine. Hiccup assured as he yawned and stretched, we'll go back in the morning. Let's just get some shut-eye first. Hiccup leaned on to Toothless and closed his eyes as Toothless curled up around him, still keeping the one wing up for Winter, who was still staring into the fire, deep in thought. She then sighed and leaned into Toothless, who closed his wing around her and fell asleep as well. Underscore 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 underscore. Brenna yawned and sat up in confusion. Until she remembered Hiccup was kind enough to sleep on the couch and offer up his bed. She stretched a bit and looked out the window. It looked like it was a few minutes before dawn. The sun was just barely hiding behind the ocean, but rays of orange light managed to shine on the village. She stood up and stretched before rubbing her eyes and walking downstairs, to be quickly greeted by Sky, who tackled her, started to lick her excitedly. You slept for like 20 hours. She exclaimed as Brenna laughed. Ha ha, sorry. I was tired. She said with a smile as Sky licked her again before jumping off and backing away. Brenna looked up and saw Valka walk over, holding a cup of water. I don't blame you for sleeping so long. After having a few sleepless nights it feels good to sleep in, for almost a day. She said as Brenna nodded in agreement and greedily drank it. So, what's happened in the last 20 hours that I missed? Brenna asked as Valka handed her a piece of bread and shrugged. Not much. Hiccup and Toothless went to drop Winter off back with her parents and Stoic trained Skullcrusher, but other than that, no, nothing really. She answered as Brenna stood up. Hey, why are you up so early? She asked. I've trained myself to only need 4 hours of sleep each night. It took about 5 years to fully master, but now I can do it without batting an eye. Valka explained as Brenna nodded before walking over to the table and grabbing another piece of bread. So, when do you think Hiccup will be back? I want to talk to him about something. She asked as Valka shrugged. Probably later this morning. She replied as a loud yawn came from upstairs, making Sky and Brenna both jump. Don't worry, it's just Stoic. He's, a bit cranky in the morning. How about you two go for a flight? Valka said as they both nodded before walking outside, the crisp morning air making Brenna grin as they took off. Okay Sky, let's track down Hiccup and Toothless. I've got to tell them about this dream I had. She said as Sky cocked her head to the side. What was the dream about? She asked as Brenna shrugged. I honestly don't remember. The only things that are still fresh in my head are a prosthetic hand, an armada, and a huge battle scene. She took a deep breath before continuing, and Talon. He was standing next to this man. He had cold dead eyes that pierced my soul. I remember, reaching out, until. She trailed off as Sky raised an eyebrow. Until what? She asked as Brenna hit her head in frustration. I can't remember. It was just in my head. She snapped before yelling at the Sky in frustration. It's not even worth it anymore. Let's just go back to the village. Maybe we can do something there. She resigned before turning Sky around and flying back towards the now bustling village. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup. Hiccup, wake up. Toothless screamed as he nudged Hiccup awake, who groaned and rolled onto his back before opening up his eyes and looking at Toothless. What? He asked as Toothless growled. A pack of southern furies are heading towards the nest. Winter went out on her own to go warm the nest. Come on. He urged as Hiccup blinked before jumping onto his back and taking off at breakneck speed. Underscore 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 underscore. Daddy is wrong. Toothless is a good influence. Winter mumbled to herself angrily as she flew towards the nest, which was now in view. Well, 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 look who it is. A cool voice said as Winter froze in her tracks and slowly turned around before gasping. It was a southern fury, but even worse, it was the one that broke into their cave and almost killed her and Hiccup, which when she thought about it, seemed like an eternity ago. The little brat that we were so close to killing. At least we killed that good-for-nothing human. He said with a grin as the whole pack of southern furies flew up behind him and sneered. Hiccup. Toothless. Help. She screamed as the leader dove for her, but she quickly dodged it and flapped towards the nest, but she was still not an experienced flyer, so the pack quickly caught up with her and the leader shot a plasma blast, hitting her on the wing. Ah! She screamed in pain as she plummeted into the grassy plain. Find her. She'll be a good hostage to use against the Northerners. The leader demanded as the southern furies started to scope out the area, making Winter quickly run behind a rock and look around nervously, her injured wing laying limply in the grass as she whimpered and curled into a ball. Mommy. Daddy. She cried as a dragon landed not too far away. She peered out from behind the rock and gasped as a southern fury sniffed the area around her. Her eyes became wide as it spotted her and smirked. Redwing. I found the girl. He yelled as the leader smirked and landed next to her. Winter whimpered in fear as Redwing tackled her and pinned her to the ground. Oh, don't worry. We won't touch a scale on your head, if you tell us, where's the girl and her blue-eyed Northerner. They have something that we need. underscore 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 underscore. Ow. Sky moaned as Brenna looked over at her in confusion. Hey Sky, are you okay? She asked as Sky shook her head. No. My stomach hurts like hell, she said before biting her lip and then letting out a sigh of relief, until her eyes got wide. Sky. You mind filling me in? Brenna asked as Sky looked down and her jaw dropped. She stepped out of the way and Brenna's jaw dropped as well. 2 large black eggs sat on the forest floor. Ah, Sky. Brenna said in shock as Sky nudged them lightly. How in Thor's name did me and Toothless have eggs? I mean, sure, we did it a few times when we finally defeated the hunters, but I never thought that. Oh gods. We're only 15. We're teenaged parents. I need to find Toothless, she said hurriedly as she picked up the eggs and gave them to Brenna. Get them back to Hiccup's house and guard them with your life, Sky instructed before quickly taking off. Okay, I'm holding my dragon's unborn babies. The village is only about a mile away. I can do this, Brenna said as she started walking, until she almost tripped on a rock. Ah. Damn it. She hissed before stating in the direction of the village in despair. Thor, help me, she muttered before continuing her trek through the uneven, rocky Birkin forest. Winter. Toothless screamed as he and Hiccup sped through the sky as fast as they could. No. Hiccup muttered as he watched the southern furies fly away, Winter screaming in terror as they flew towards their nest. Winter. He screamed as Toothless shot towards the northern nest and flying onto the battle plateau. Everyone. Southern furies just took Winter as a hostage. Toothless roared as a bunch of night furies gasped and flew onto the rock and gathered around them. You lost her, Tempest snarled as he flew up to them. Fuck off, Tempest. We've treated Winter better than you and Dusk ever have, Hiccup hissed coolly before turning back around. What will our tactics be? Toothless asked as Deathkiller landed next to him. This needs to be an ambush attack. While most of us fight the Southerners, a few dragons need to sneak in and grab Winter, Deathkiller explained as Sky quickly flew up next to Toothless. She took a few deep breaths before looking up. Toothless. You'll never guess what just happened, dash. Wind just got captured by Southern Furies. Can't it wait? He snapped as Sky's face fell and she backed up. Oh okay, she stuttered before Toothless and the other dragons took off towards the southern nest. Underscore 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 underscore. Brenna haphazardly kicked a door open and fell to the floor in exhaustion, making sure not to let the eggs crack. Brenna. What happened to you? Stoic asked as he stood up from his chair and gave her a hand. Sky laid some eggs, where's Valka? She would probably know what to do in this situation, she asked. Valka went back to that nest. Something about telling the Alpha some important news. She was in a bit of a hurry so I didn't ask, he responded as Brenna cursed under her breath. Okay, then do you know where Astrid and Stormfly are? She asked as Stoic nodded. Yes, I'm pretty sure they just came back from training in the woods, he said before Brenna picked up the eggs and nodded. Okay, thanks Chief, she said before walking out. Underscore 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 underscore. Hey, Astrid. You home? Brenna asked as she tried to knock on the door with her knee. Wait just a second, a voice yelled from inside as footsteps could be heard pounding down the stairs. Astrid then appeared at the door. She had clearly just come back from the bathhouse because her hair was down and soaking wet and she was wearing a loose-fitting, flowing dress instead of her usual get-up of spiky skirts and shoulder pads. Brenna started to blush before shakily her head and looking up. "Oh, hey Brenna. What are those?" she asked as Brenna walked inside and set the eggs down on Astrid's table. "Those are Sky's eggs. Apparently her and Toothless had a little fun, and now I'm stuck with them until she gets back from telling Toothless," she answered as Astrid asked before looking at the eggs curiously. "Why did you bring them here? Valka is probably a lot more equipped to." "I tried. Apparently she went off to the nest to go tell the alpha something. And since Hiccup's gone and I definitely don't trust Stoic with carrying the eggs, I thought you'd be a good backup," she said before Astrid raised an eyebrow. "Backup? Astrid Horferson is not a backup. She's a front down," Astrid said before realizing how stupid that sounded. "Whoa, you totally sound like Snotlout," Brenna said as Astrid punched her on the arm playfully before picking up one of the eggs. "Come on, let's go get these to Stormfly," Astrid said before walking to the back of her house and opening the door that led to Stormfly's stable. "Stormfly?" she whispered as Stormfly groggily lifted up her head from a nap. "Oh, hi Astrid. Brenna," she greeted before stretching. "Hey Stormfly, can you watch these eggs for a little bit? Just until Sky gets back with Hiccup and Toothless?" Brenna asked as Stormfly nodded. "Sure. But can you tell Astrid that I'm hungry for some chicken?" she asked as Brenna gave her the eggs and nodded. "Sure, Astrid, you might want to get your dragon some chicken," Brenna said as Astrid nodded before running back inside and up the stairs. "Hey. Can you grab my skirt and shoulder pads? I think left them on the counter," she called out as Brenna nodded and picked them up before running upstairs and stopping at Astrid's bedroom door. She stood there for a few moments before Astrid walked out. Brenna handed her the clothes before they both walked downstairs and outside towards the Great Hall. "Where are your parents?" Brenna asked as Astrid shrugged. "They went to go visit my older brother. He just got married and fell in love with his wife's village and tribe, so he moved out there instead of his wife moving here," she explained. "So how long will they be gone?" Brenna asked as Astrid shrugged again. "They said about 2 to 3 weeks, but I think they are gonna stay a little longer, so probably about a month," Astrid said before an awkward silence fell between them. "Suuuu, Burke, it's pretty great isn't it?" Astrid asked as Brenna perked up and nodded. "Yeah, it's awesome. Although I kinda miss Terra. Those huge fields, the amazing sunsets. Have you even watched a Birkin sunset?" Astrid cut in as Brenna shook her head. "Well no. But they can't nearly be as good as terrain ones. You climb up onto a tall tree and watch the sun fall below the mountains. Or sit in a field of flowers and watch it dip below the ocean," she reminisced as Astrid laughed and noticed the sky was turning orange. "Come on. I'll show you one right now," Astrid offered before walking past the Great Hall and towards one of the cliffs overlooking the ocean. "Hey, what about Stormfly? Isn't she hungry?" Brenna asked as Astrid shrugged. "She can wait. You need to see this," she said with a smile, making Brenna blush again as they crawled up to the cliff and swung their legs over the cliff and stared at the setting sun. "Okay, this is pretty great too," Brenna admitted as Astrid laughed. "Yeah, they're amazing. Especially if you're in the air on a dragon. My first flight on Stormfly was absolutely incredible. She basically gave me an aerial tour of the island during the sunset. It was magical," she muttered as Brenna scorched just a bit closer to her. "My first flight on Sky was far from that. Hiccup had Sky grab me while my village was trying to kill her. It scared the hell out of me," she said as they both laughed and the sun finally started to dip down under the ocean. "Hey Astrid," Brenna said as Astrid turned to face her, and then Brenna leaned in and kissed her on the lips. Astrid's eyes opened wide in alarm as Brenna quickly pulled away and her cheeks burned dark red. I am so sorry. I'm trying to figure some stuff out," she muttered before running off as fast as she could. Astrid just sat and stared in the direction Brenna ran off. After a few minutes she touched her lips in confusion. "Huh," she muttered quietly before staring back out at sea. "Huh. Talon had been with the Drago and his army for almost 2 weeks now. It was strange, all of this, from the icy and metallic atmosphere of the Armada to the giant bubbles rising from the depths of the ocean, felt strangely like home. Talon sat in his bedroom, looking up at the ceiling. He occasionally looked down at his fake hand before sighing and sitting up. Then a scream came from the upper deck as Talon listened intently. "Dragon Rider!" Someone yelled as he quickly ran out and onto the upper deck and looked at about 10 dragons flying around the armada. He squinted before gasping and stumbling back in shock. "No," he muttered as he stared in the direction of 2 certain dragons, Cloudjumper and Jade. "Get down, mate!" A voice yelled as Eret ran past and quickly tackled Talon to the ground, saving him from a blast of fire. "Goddamn it, Talon! Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he snapped as Talon stuttered. Sorry Eret, I just..." "Leave him be," Drago said coolly as he walked up to them. Eret instantly became on edge, all of his features screamed nervousness and worry. But for some reason, Talon felt strangely calm. Enough to so that even he was confused. Drago was a 7-foot warlord with a dragon army and a taste for blood. Why was he so calm? It didn't make any sense. "Dr. Drago, I just saved him from being burned alive. I was not bothering him in any way. I swear." Eret pleaded as Drago looked over at Talon, who shook his head. "He wasn't bothering me, Drago," Talon said sternly as Drago looked up and noticed Valka, who quickly landed Cloudjumper on one of the ships to free some dragons. "Attack the rider!" he screamed as Talon froze with fear. He wanted to do something, he really did, but his body refused to move. "Cloudjumper!" Valka screamed as a net was thrown over them before 2 tranquilizer darts were thrown with perfect accuracy, striking both of them in the neck. "Oh my gods!" Talon whispered quietly as Drago grinned. "We've finally caught her," he muttered as Talon looked up at him. "Finally?" he asked nervously as Eret chuckled behind them. "Oh yes. We've been trying to take down that rider for almost 15 years now," he exclaimed as Talon felt a sinking feeling. "Oh ho, we're going to have fun with her." Drago chuckled as Talon inwardly started to freak out. They had just captured Valka. What was she doing so far up north? Why was she attacking them? How mad will Hiccup and Brenna be? They both obviously care about her greatly. I need to go," he said quickly before running out as fast as possible, but not before he briefly captured the eye of a certain dragon. Jade flew down a bit closer to the ship in confusion. "Talon. Underscore 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 underscore. Brenna had pretty much stayed locked in Hiccup's room ever since the kiss. She never wanted to see Astrid ever again. Oh gods. What the hell have I done? Why couldn't I have chosen Rough Nut? Wait, never mind. But I mean, come on. My best friend's girlfriend. She yelled to herself as she heard a knock on the window and looked over to see Astrid hovering there on Stormfly. Brenna sighed before walking over and reluctantly opening the window. "Hey, can we talk?" Astrid asked as she sighed and opened up the window all the way, allowing Astrid to crawl in. "Go play with the other nadders," she said as Stormfly squawked and flew off. "So?" Astrid trailed off as Brenna played with one of Hiccup's spyglasses. "So?" Brenna said as an awkward silence filled the room. After about 5 minutes of awful silence, Astrid finally broke it as she noticed the eggs wrapped in a few blankets and next to some burning coals. "How are the eggs doing?" she asked as Brenna looked up. I know, I'm so sorry. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing and I'll never do it again." She apologized as Astrid put a hand on her shoulder. "Okay, I admit it was weird. But it's totally fine, you're going through some things right now. Your boyfriend died for Thor's sake." "Talon wasn't my boyfriend," Brenna said as Astrid scratched her head. "But I thought you two." "Nope. We've never even kissed." She sighed as Astrid bit her lip. "Oh. Then it must have been kinda hard, seeing me kiss Hiccup like that," she asked as Brenna nodded. "Yeah, you two are polar opposites. But you work really well," Brenna explained as Astrid smiled. "Thanks." she said before another awkward silence formed around them. So, I've seen the other guys are into you. Why don't you give them a try? Astrid offered as Brenna shook her head. No, they're not really my type. Snotlout's too egotistical, Fishlegs is too much of a know-it-all, and Tough Nut is, well, irritatingly funny. Astrid finished as they both laughed. Boy, it's sure taking Sky, Hiccup, and Toothless a long time to get back. Brenna muttered as Astrid nodded. Yeah, shouldn't they have been back by yesterday? She asked as Brenna shrugged. Underscore 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 underscore. Toothless. Sky yelled as she managed to fly up to him and Hiccup, who were trying to fight off the hordes of southern furies as they tried to reach Winter, who was being guarded by Redwing and his goons. Sky, for the love of Thor, what is so important? Toothless snarled as Sky whimpered. The reason I flew all the way out here was to tell you *, takes deep breath *, I laid 2 eggs. She said as Hiccup and Toothless' jaws dropped. We're going to be parents? Toothless asked in shock as Sky nodded happily. I know, I can't believe it either. Toothless, watch out. Hiccup screamed as a plasma blast came hurling in their direction and Sky quickly dove down, but Toothless hesitated for a second too long and was hit in the side hard. Ow! God damn it! Toothless screamed as he and Hiccup plummeted out of the sky. Hiccup slid off his back in an unconscious state, since the blast hit him too, and hit the ground with a thud, Toothless not far behind. Toothless! Sky screamed as she drove down. What happened? Winter screamed as she tried to run past Redwing and see the battle, but he snarled with an evil grin on his face, making Winter whimper. My blast made that Grayscale and his rider drop like flies. He said with a wicked grin, making all of the color drain from Winter's face. No. Toothless. Hiccup. She screamed desperately, but there was no use. Tears started to fall down her cheeks as she watched Sky dive down past the tree line. Wait. That's the northerner that we want. Her and the girl. Get her. Redwing commanded as about 3 southern furies flew past him and down towards Sky. Hey. Let go of me. Toothless Hiccup, no. She screamed as the southern furies tore her away from the dragon and rider. No. She yelled as she thrashed violently. She noticed blood pooling around both Hikyo and Toothless as tears started to form in her eyes. No. She croaked before being thrown in a heavily guarded cave. Redwing's busy right now, but he'll be dealing with you later. One of the guards said as Sky glared at them before staring off in the direction of Burke sadly. Please don't hatch while we're away. She whispered sadly before curling up in a ball. Underscore 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 underscore. Toothless coughed and weakly stood up. He noticed Hiccup next to him and he was quickly filled with a sense of dread. Hiccup? He asked before nudging the teenager, who gave a small groan in response and Toothless sighed in relief. We need to get back up. Toothless whispered before carefully picking up Hiccup and throwing him onto his back. I can't fly or swim in this state, hell I can barely walk. Maybe we should go by the beach and hope that someone happens to not hate dragons and find us. He muttered as Hiccup groaned again before coughing violently and shuddering. I know, but we have to at least try and find help. Toothless said as Hiccup weakly sat up. He tore off one of his sleeves and tied it around his waist to stop the blood flow. Sorry Toothless, it wouldn't fit around you. He apologized as Toothless licked him before starting to walk towards the beach. Oh gods, I just really hope we make it back in time to see my babies. He sighed as Hiccup patted his head sadly. Underscore 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 underscore. Brenna awoke to the sound of an explosion that night. She yelped and fell out of bed before noticing a small fire on the other side of the room. She quickly grabbed the blanket and threw it over the controlled flame, putting it out instantly. She sighed in relief before noticing something that made her blood run cold. Two figures squirmed underneath the sheet. She warily pulled it off before gasping. Two baby night furies sat in a heap of blankets and shards of eggs. One of them was a boy with dark pale blue scales and bright blue eyes, and the other, a girl with midnight blue scales and teal eyes, a line of grey scales running down her back and onto her tail. They both shook their wings before grinning and running around excitedly. "Oh no! Oh gods!" Brenna muttered quietly as the hatchlings jumped up and ran around Hiccup's room energetically. "Mommy?" the girl asked as the blood drained from Brenna's face. "They'd imprinted on her." "No. No, I am not your mommy. She's not here right now, neither is your daddy. But don't worry, they'll be back soon," she assured as the girl ran up to her and started to lick her face. "Mommy!" she exclaimed as Brenna groaned. "Oh great. Underscore 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 underscore. Toothless POV. I roared desperately into the starry night sky, hoping, praying, that someone heard. Even if a little terrible terror heard my call, it would all be worth it. My throat burned as my screeches slowly started to become quieter and quieter. I lay down and drank from a small puddle. I sigh and look over at Hiccup. I couldn't let him die here. And I need to meet my children. He-ee-ee-ee-eelp. I roar one more time before flopping down on the sand, the fine grains stinging the burn on my side, but I don't care. Pee please. I whimper before letting my eyes slide close. Over there. I perked up and looked around. I could have sworn I heard someone. Hello. I roar as I notice something in the distance blocking out the band of stars above us. I move towards Hiccup and put a wing over him, just in case. Toothless. The dragon yelled as I cock my head to the side. What? I yell back shakily, who was this? Toothless. The dragon yelled in a relieved manner. Now I was confused. My confusion then turned to utter joy as the dragon and rider finally got close to us. I could only faintly see, but I could see it. Skullcrusher flapped towards them quickly, Stoic holding out one of the arrows Hiccup made for his bow. Skullcrusher. Over here. I roar as loud as I can before shooting a plasma blast into the air, letting him know it was definitely me. I move over so Hiccup is no longer under my wing and try to nudge him awake. Really the only sign that he was still alive was his chest slowly moving up and down. Stoic and Skullcrusher quickly landed next to us and I let out a relieved sigh. We were saved. Underscore 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 underscore. Well, look what we have here. Drago sneered maliciously as he walked around a cell. In it was Valka. Her hands were tied with rope and they had gagged her mouth so she could speak. She glared at him coolly as Drago chuckled. Like you could ever intimidate me, especially without your precious dragon and nest. He said as Valka's eyes widened and she stood up and ran up to the bars, a look of pure horror on her face. What did you do to him? She demanded in a very muffled voice as Drago smirked and nodded to two trappers, who pulled the cover off of a cage. Where Cloudjumper was sleeping, his once beautiful or natural look now soiled by a heavy-looking suit of metal armor. He will be a great addition to my army. Drago grinned as Valka glared at him furiously before stepping back looking past him, noticing a few of the other dragons that she came with in cages as well. You won't get away with this. She snarled in a barely understandable tone, making Drago chuckle as grabbed her by the shirt. He inspected her up and down before grinning and throwing her back onto the metal floor. She hit it with a painful thud as Drago walked away briskly. I've got to get out of here. Valka thought desperately before looking over at Cloudjumper and sighing. There'd have to be a miracle for her to get out of this one. underscore 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 underscore. What do you want with us? Sky snarled as she looked over and saw Winter cowering in the corner. We don't need her. But she's not strong enough of a flyer to go get help. So we can let her go. Redwing said as Winter looked over at Sky nervously, who nodded. Go. She said as Winter raced out as fast as she could. Now. Back to you. Redwing said as he turned to face Sky. He was a lot bigger and more intimidating, but it didn't faze her. Again, what the hell do you want with me? Sky hissed as Redwing laughed. A feisty one, huh? And isn't it obvious? We want our gems back. He stated obvious as Sky raised an eyebrow. Gems? What in the name of Thor are you talking about? She asked as Redwing's dragons chuckled, but a flick of his paw made them stop immediately. Our gems. We found them in the heart of our ancestral home. He explained as Sky scratched her head. Strike Mountain. Gems. Can you please just explain what the hell is happening? She yelled as Redwing pounced on her angrily. There were 40 gems on Strike Mountain. Us Southerners got 10, the Northerns got 10, and then the rest were split up between the rest of the Strike class. 200 years ago, our islands lived in peace. Until a power-hungry dragon on your side stole one of ours and she turned herself immortal. Redwing started as he crawled off of Sky. Why wouldn't she just use one of our gems? She asked as Redwing sighed. Ours were more powerful. Sure, all of them held amazing power, but the leader of your island wanted the ones that gave knowledge and healing properties. Our leader wanted the ones that held the most power. Anyways, we were angry, so we tried to fight for it back, or at least take the dragon in question hostage. During the raid, that dragon snuck away and stole the rest of our gems. They gave him unimaginable power, the ability to control all 4 elements, to become gifted with the strength of the gods, to shift between any dragon at will. She was unbeatable. And while he was gone, one of us accidentally killed your alpha's hatchlings. And the war began. But your protector of the gems, Snowflake. She protected them at all costs. And she has kept them safe for the past 200 years. Redwing explained as Sky stared at him in wonder. Why had no one ever told her this? The Northern tribe never has spoken of this. It seemed too dark for a dragon to do something like that, it seemed low even for a human. What was the dragon's name? Sky asked. Her real name was Aqua. But you may have heard of what she is called now, Saga. Redwing said solemnly as Sky's jaw dropped. Did Saga? She stuttered as Redwing nodded. How do you know all this? It's common knowledge among us Southerns. He said as Sky sighed. That was terrible and all. But why do you need me? She asked. Because your rider has the gem of dragons. Redwing explained as Sky gasped. Wait. So Brenna is the one protecting one of our gems? She asked in shock as Redwing nodded. Yes, but with a price. You see, when a dragon wields the power to a gem, it just increases their strength, stamina, and agility. When a human has it, it slowly turns them into a dragon. We need it to stop Saga once and for all. She is most weak when the moon is gone. He explained as Sky gasped. Then you need to let me and get the gem back. She said urgently as she readied herself to race out of the nest, but Redwing stopped her. No, I do not trust you enough to leave. Tell us where the girl is. He demanded as Sky glared at him. And how do I know that you won't hurt her? How about we go together? She bargained as Redwing nodded. That seems fair. Now let's get a move on. It will be gone in less than a week and she is hiding in the far north. He said as they took off quickly, their wings slicing through the cool dawn air as they soared above the low clouds and into the pale blue, orange, and pink sky. While they soared above the clouds, Winter flapped haphazardly over the island. She was an inexperienced flyer and it showed. She flew barely past the beach before turning back and resting on the sand, but in her defense, she had had a pretty rough night. Winter? A voice asked, making her head whip around to see Toothless, He gave her a gummy smile as she ran up to him happily. Toothless. You're okay? She explained excitedly before looking around. Where's Hiccup? She asked. Toothless would have simply told her how, since they'd been gone for a few days. Stoic took Skullcrusher out to find them and how they were going to get help, but he couldn't get over the fact that Winter had said Hiccup's name correctly. No cute gap in between the two Cs. Can you say his name again? Toothless asked in a hushed tone. It may sound strange, especially since he was the oldest of 6, but he really didn't want Winter to grow up. He had always treated her as his hatchling in a sense. Hiccup. She repeated, and it sounded a bit deeper, more mature. Winter was growing up. Oh. Well, Stoic and Skullcrusher found us and went to go get help from Burke. He explained as Winter nodded and sat down next to him. Wow, at this age I should still be in the nest, playing with Mom and Dad and learning how to master flying. She laughed as Toothless let out a small chuckle. Yeah. And in less than 2 months you've been captured by dragon hunters, almost killed multiple times, and captured by Southern Furies. Toothless said as Winter giggled. I get my knack for getting in trouble from you, Mr. Disowned. She joked before realizing how absolutely terrible it was. Toothless, I didn't mean. No, it's fine. You, Sky, Hiccup, and Brenner are all the family I need. He said as Winter smiled and curled up next to him before falling asleep, and Toothless put a wing over her before falling asleep as well. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup groaned and felt oddly warm, but the pain in his side throbbed painfully. Damn, that hurts. He muttered before sitting up and screaming in shock as he slid off Skullcrusher's back, but was caught just in time by Stoic. He watched his father's cape flutter away in the breeze, so that's why he was so warm. Language. Stoic said, making Hiccup grin and roll his eyes as he lifted him back up. Hey Dad, how? I found one of your arrows and your mother told me he's a tracker. So I went out after you. Stoic explained as Hiccup's face turned to a look of panic. Where's Toothless? He asked in a rushed tone as Stoic gestured for him to relax. He's still on the island. What? He snarled, his eyes turning to slits. Stoic had almost forgotten those draconic eyes. They were so mesmerizing. Hiccup, calm down. When I get back your mother will be there and her dragon can carry Toothless back. He explained as Hiccup shook his head. No. We can't do that. They'll get caught by the Southern Furies. The only reason we were on that island was because we were trying to save Winter. He said as Stoic gave him a confused look. The Southern Furies are the nest that Toothless is at war with. They kidnapped Winter as a hostage. Dragons take hostages and are at war with each other. Stoic asked in shock as Hiccup nodded. Things are a lot more complicated than you'd think when it comes to dragons. He said as Burke came into distance in the horizon. I can't wait to sleep in my own bed. Hiccup muttered as Stoic laughed as they raced towards the island. Underscore 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 underscore. Okay, I need you two to both calm down. Brenner told the hatchlings strictly as they both hopped onto Hiccup's bed and tore it apart with their claws before running down the stairs, knocking over items as they went. Get back here now. She snapped in a demanding tone. They barely even turned their heads, making Brenner grit her teeth in anger. Back here now. She roared, making the hatchlings stop in their tracks and look over at her fearfully. Brenner took a few angry deep breaths before realizing what she had done. How? She trailed off in shock as the door swung open. Hey Bren. Is everything okay? Hiccup slowly finished as he and Stoic walked into the house and stared at the mess in shock as the hatchlings hid in the corner. She said dumbly as Stoic pushed past Hiccup and looked around angrily. I leave you here alone for one measly day and you manage to destroy the entire house. I'm surprised you weren't more consciences. It was one of the great traits about your father. Stoic abruptly stopped as movement behind the flipped-over table caught both his and Hiccup's eyes. Huh? Hiccup asked himself quietly before walking over and gasping, seeing the two hatchlings playing with each other. Daddy. The boy explained as Hiccup's eyes widened in fear and he looked up at Brenna, who shrugged helplessly. I'm Mommy and your daddy, she said as the hatchlings jumped on Hiccup, who just had a dazed look on his face. We need to get Toothless and Sky back. Talon wandered across the armada, pacing back and forth at random times when he thought of Valka and Cloudjumper being trapped with him, or the fact that Jade might have seen him during the chaos. He quickly ran to the main ship and down into the lower deck. He was about to walk into his room, until a large hand grabbed his shoulder. What's been going on with you? Drago questioned as Talon laughed nervously. Something's going on. I thought things were great. He stuttered as Drago glared at him coolly before grinning. Come with me. I want to show you something, he said before grabbing Talon's fake hand and walking away briskly, making Talon lurch forwards and struggle to keep up. Where are we going, sir? He asked, a bead of nervous sweat dripping down his face as Drago led him onto another ship. This is where we keep our prisoners. And this. He paused as he opened up a door, making Talon gasp. It was Valka. She was covered in whip marks and bruises with her hands and feet bound to the wall and her clothes were ripped in places dangerously close to other places. Her tear-stained cheeks made Talon fill with both guilt and rage. He didn't care that Drago was an evil warlord. This was inhumane, is what happens to people who try and defy me. At that, Valka looked up, her face filled with rage and determination. Until she looked at Talon and gasped. You. She said, her face full of shock as Talon looked around nervously. There was no way of getting out of this. What? Drago questioned as he looked between Talon and Valka. Why you? You're Brenna's friend. You saved us from the dragon hunters. Gasps Toothless killed you. How? What is she talking about? Drago said with surprising calmness as Talon gulped nervously. I have no idea. She doesn't know what she's talking about. He defended as Valka glared at him. You saved my life back on Berk. I can't believe this. You weren't a dragon hunter, you were a dragon trapper. She snarled as Drago looked at Talon. Who is Brenna? He asked as Talon was about to speak, until Valka shook her head violently. Drago couldn't know about Berk and all the Night Furies. Oh, telling him to defy orders. You're going to regret that later. Drago hissed as Valka flinched and Talon gave her sympathetic look before following, but a slight noise made him stop. Get me out of here. She whispered, fear etched into her features. I'll get Jade for you, we can go back to Berk, and you can see Brenna. And I could maybe even persuade Stoic to let you stay on the island. But I can't take this. And he's doing something to Cloudjumper. He barely thinks for himself anymore. We need to get him out of here. Talon. Drago snapped from outside, making Talon and Valka both flinch. I'll try. He whispered before running out and closing the door behind him, making Valka let out a sigh of relief. Underscore 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 underscore. So, what exactly is happening to Brenna? Sky asked as Redwing sighed. First she'll be able to speak in our native tongue. Then, slowly, she'll start to grow scales. Then wings. Then a tail. And at the end, she'll look like a normal dragon, just like you and me. He explained as Sky gasped. Will she be a Night Fury? Or some other dragon? She questioned as Redwing looked down in thought. By the way you described her personality, I would have to say she's probably be a Timberjack. He answered as Sky noticed a small dot in the distance. Berk. Come on, we should reach the island by midday. She said as she and Redwing quickened their pace towards the island. underscore 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 underscore. These things are harder to control than you. Stoic exclaimed as he dove for the girl hatchling, who giggled and jumped out of the way. Hiccup shot him a quick glare before cornering the boy, who laughed and shot a plasma blast at Hiccup, who gasped and ducked out of the way, the blast destroying a sword hanging on the wall. Daddy! Daddy's daddy! This the best! The boy exclaimed as he leapt onto Hiccup's chest and licked him, giving Hiccup the opportunity to grab him and throw him into a basket Stoic had ready. Hee. It dark! He exclaimed as Stoic sighed in relief and sat on the basket. Where is that friend of yours? Their mommy needs to help us get that one, he said as the girl ran about the cluttered house. Play. 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 She chanted as Brenna walked into the house, her nose buried in a book as Hiccup dove after the girl. Bren. A little help? He asked as Brenna gestured for him to be quiet. Shut up, she said dismissively, making Hiccup shot her an annoyed look before chasing after the young hatchling again. Oh, yes. This is perfect, she exclaimed as she slammed the book shut and looked up excitedly. Stoic was giving her a look urging her to tell him, while Hiccup struggled with the girl. I completely forgot about this. It's a potion we made all the time back on Terra. Dragon Rollig. It has a calming effect on night furies, she exclaimed as Hiccup finally pinned the hatchling down. Okay, how do make it? He asked as Brenna looked through the pages, and her face fell. Oh no, she muttered, I need a Gria flower. It only grows on the skirts of the village on Terra. We plant it on cliffs that look out over the ocean. It's really beautiful. Great. So then we have to wrangle these guys until one of our dragons come back. Hiccup grumbled as the girl escaped his grasp and jumped onto Stoic, who fell over in shock, letting the boy out of the basket. Come on. Hiccup snarled as he and Stoic ran after the hatchlings once again. Brenna! A voice cried in the distance, making Hiccup and Brenna both perk up. Wait. Sky! Brenna muttered as they turned towards the door. But how? She was kidnapped. Hiccup whispered. What are you two mumbling about? Stoic asked as he pushed past them and opened the door. Where's Brenna? We need her now. Sky screamed as she landed mere inches away from Stoic, making him gasp and back away, allowing Sky to run past him and pinned Brenna to the ground. Sky! Oh, I'm so happy to see you! Brenna exclaimed as she gave Sky a huge hug. Brenna! I need you to give me that gem, now, she said urgently as Brenna scratched her head in confusion and Hiccup looked out the door to see Redwing waiting patiently outside. You! Hiccup snarled as he looked at Redwing, who perked up and his face fell. Kid, I'm on your side now, no need to throw a hissy fit. Get away from him. In a blur, a dark figure tackled Redwing, who quickly threw the figure off, revealing Toothless. The burn in his side as grotesque as ever, but somehow he'd made it back. Toothless? Hiccup asked quietly as Toothless walked in front of him and snarled protectively. At that moment, a girl on a dark green skrill landed next to them and drew her bow. Who are you? Hiccup gasped as the girl shot him a quick glance. She had platinum blonde hair that was swept over one shoulder and intense ocean blue eyes. She was wearing a plain brown sleeveless shirt and black pants with dark brown leather boots. She had brown arm guards and a black waist-high belt. I'm Kalia, she said, not even bothering to look at him. Who was this girl? Underscore 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 underscore. A few hours earlier. Yelp. Toothless roared as Winter sighed. Toothless, it's no use. We just need to wait for your burn to get better, she reasoned as Toothless sighed. She was right. Just let me try one more time. Someone please help us. He roared even louder than the last time. Is someone there? a voice asked as Toothless and Winter both gasped. And you doubted optimism? Toothless said with a sly grin, making Winter stick her tongue out at him. Yes. Over here. They looked over to see a dark green squirrel flying around the island and making its way towards them. And perched on its back was a rider. Her long platinum blonde hair flowing freely behind her, and they landed next to them. Whoa, 2 runts. Did they outcast you? The girl asked as Toothless gave her a confused look. What? No. We're Northern Furies. We're just trapped on the island. He explained. Kalia looked at his burn. Wow, that's bad. Do you guys need a lift? Shock and I can get you back to the Isle of Night. She offered as Toothless shook his head and Winter came out from behind him. We aren't going to the Isle of Night, she said as Kalia looked over at her. Ah, aren't you adorable? She cooed as Winter pouted. I'm not cute, she mumbled as Toothless stepped in front of him. You need to take us to Berk. It's a small island in the middle of the archipelago, he explained as Shock shook his head. Oh no. The archipelago is nothing but trouble, he said sternly as Toothless gave him a pleading look. Please, you see, my rider is there. His father came and saved him on his rumble horn and said that they'd come back for me. But I feel like something's wrong, he explained as Kalia looked at Shock, who shook his head. We'll get you to that island, she said with determination as Shock gasped before shooting her a glare. Kalia. I'm not risking either of us getting caught, he said as Kalia rolled her eyes. Come on, live a little. He needs help, and it's not like we're doing anything important, she said as Toothless perked up. So you'll take us? He asked hopefully as Kalia laughed and nodded. Yeah, of course. Come on. But if you can, try and solo fly some of it. Shock can't carry you the entire way, she said as she picked up Winter and got onto Shock's back. I can try, thank you so much. I'll pay you back somehow, I swear, he stuttered as Kalia smiled. No problem. And don't worry, you don't need to pay us back. We're lone wolves out here and like it that way. We don't need any favors, she said as she nodded her head towards the horizon. Come on, you need to show us the way there. Thanks, and again, thank you. Toothless thanked as he took off, hissing in pain as he flapped his wings. Underscore 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 underscore. Present. No. Toothless. He's on our side. Sky screamed as she threw herself onto Toothless, who threw her off and noticed the hatchlings out of the corner of his eye. The hatchlings. Sky. Get them and run. He roared as Sky whipped around and gasped. Our hatchlings? She asked quietly as they walked up from behind Brenna, who was staring out the door in shock. Yeah, these guys are yours, Brenna said with a smile. Toothless snarled, snapping Sky out of her daze as Kalia and Shock advanced on Redwing, who hissed angrily and Toothless' eyes turned to slits. Idiots. I'm on your side, he defended as Toothless chuckled darkly. Yeah, of course you would want us to think that, he growled as a plasma blast started to grow in his throat, making Sky gasp. Toothless, no, she screamed desperately before throwing herself in front of Redwing as the bright purple plasma blast erupted from his throat, making dust and smoke fly up. And then, there was an eerie silence. As the dust settled, Toothless' heart utterly sank. His entire being filled up with guilt and regret. He finally got view of Sky, who was being nudged by Redwing. Hey, Sky Scale. It's going to be okay, he assured as Sky coughed and nodded. Toothless instantly sprinted over as Hiccup and Brenna both waved off the dust before gasping and running over as well. Sky had a huge burn under her wing. It was about the size of a human head and throbbed profusely. The smell wafting off it made Brenna hold back the urge to vomit and she started gagging. Sky. She coughed as Sky weakly lifted up her head and looked at Brenna. She still had the gem around her neck. Brenna, get that thing off your neck, now, she commanded as Brenna touched the gem in confusion. Why would I take it off? She asked as Redwing gave her a stern glare as Toothless pushed him out of the way to make room for him to care for Sky. Because it's dangerous, that's why. Now give it here. He demanded as Brenna took a step back. And why should I trust you? You kidnapped Sky and Winter and almost killed Hiccup and Toothless. She questioned as Redwing sighed. I wouldn't buy it. Kalia said, catching them all off guard. They'd forgotten she was there. This dragon obviously had a huge grudge against you guys. I wouldn't trust him with something as valuable as that gem. This was the first time Brenna had actually gotten a good look at Kalia. She blushed a bit before turning back to Redwing. Brenna, give him the gem. Sky said before noticing a small clump of greyish-pink scales peeking out just under her arm wraps. Do it now. Okay. Okay. Damn, you need to calm down. Brenna muttered before snapping off the bracelet and throwing it to Redwing, who gently caught it, but the scales on Brenna's arm didn't disappear. No, she's right. Look. Hiccup exclaimed as he pointed to the clump of scales, making Brenna screech in horror. That is why I need it back. With this and the other northern gems, we can take down Saga. And bring the other gems back to safety with us southerners. Redwing said as Brenna took a few deep breaths. Who's Saga? She asked as Sky shakily stood up. That doesn't matter right now. Wait, did he say Saga? Toothless butt in as Redwing nodded. Yes, why do you ask? He asked as Toothless' eyes widened and he looked Redwing straight in the eye. I know her. Underscore 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 underscore. A growl echoed through the barren tundra, even farther north than Valka's sanctuary. A little vole scurried across the icy ground, but it was quickly whisked away by a dark blur. It screeched in fear before two hands twisted its neck and threw it up in the air. A dark head looked up and opened up its mouth wide as the tiny mammal fell in and was chomped by a sickening crunch. Those things are pathetic. Wallowing their lives away in this wasteland. Just like me. The figure muttered before toggling its long dark hair out of her face. It was a woman. With porcelain white skin and greasy jet black hair that fell over her perfect features, a beautiful smile, a button nose, and round stunning aqua blue eyes that pierced through the swirling snow. She wore a weathered dark purple tunic and torn black pants, her feet were bare and covered with jet black scales. A pair of wings tore through her already ripped tunic and she burst from the ice with incredible speed. 10 gems dangled around her neck as she burst through the clouds and looked up at the painfully bright sun. She squinted and waved her hands, making the sky turn dark and the moon showed up. It was almost gone. No. She snarled before changing the sky back to its daytime state and diving back down into the swirling clouds below. Her scales started to turn white and she roared as she turned into a snow wraith. When the moon turns full and winter is upon us, I will finally be able to come out of hiding. She muttered before letting out a heart-stopping roar, making the snow and wind stop as a wicked smile grew on her face. Underscore 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 underscore. Wait, what do you mean you know her? Sky demanded as Toothless put up his paws defensively. Sky, calm down. It was about 10 years ago and I went on a mission up to the north to try and scout Viking territories. I got too close during a raid. I was so sure I was going to be shot down, but then an adder spine saved me. The dragon in question led me away from the battle and into the forest. She told me that she was a gift sent from Valhalla to grace us with her beauty and power. Then the raid was over and she left in a hurry. Toothless explained as Redwing looked down in thought. Again, who is Saga? Brenna asked as she warily scratched the scales on her arm. She was a northern warrior, but then she turned to the dark side and stole all of the southern gems. She hides out in the far north now. Sky explained as Hiccup, Brenna, and Kalia all gasped. Hiccup and Brenna both looked down as the hatchlings squeezed through her legs, making Toothless and Sky look at them in shock. We both missed it, didn't we? Toothless asked sadly as Brenna nodded. They hatched a few nights ago. She muttered as Sky walked up and nuzzled the boy, who crawled away and walked over to Hiccup. Daddy, why is Strange Dragon touching me? He asked as Toothless and Sky's eyes welled up with tears. No sweetie. I'm your daddy. Toothless assured as the boy cocked his head in confusion. Daddy? He asked as Hiccup nudged him towards Toothless and Sky. Fireheart. Toothless muttered as he looked up at Sky, it was going to be my brother's name, until. He trailed off sadly as Hiccup put a solemn hand on his head. Then her name will be Hearthwing. But we'll just call her Hearth for short. Sky concluded as she licked the girl, who giggled. Wow, well I feel out of place. I barely know you guys and I just watched what I assume is a very intimate moment. Kalia said as Brenna laughed. You're fine. You brought Toothless back. She said as Kalia smiled. Wow, didn't expect such a warm welcome. She muttered as Brenna blushed before looking back over at the happy Night Fury family. But their peace was short-lived, for a cry came from above. Hiccup. Astrid screamed as Stormfly quietly landed and she tumbled off of her back. Astrid. Are you okay? Hiccup yelped as Astrid sucked in a few deep breaths. It's about your mom. She's been captured. She said in rushed tone as Hiccup's eyes widened in horror. Where's my dad? Underscore 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 underscore. How do you know she was captured? Stoic questioned quickly as Astrid pointed outside, where a new face popped up. Jade. Stormfly and I were out on a flight and she showed up. She told Stormfly that Valka had been captured by some dragon trappers, who want dragons for an army their leader is forming. Astrid explained as Hiccup looked up in terror. Cloudjumper. He muttered. How did you know what she said? Only Hiccup, Kalia, and I can understand the dragons. Brenna said as Astrid shook her head. I can understand very basic bits and pieces and I taught Stormfly how to write basic Norse. I heard captured and help. Then Jade showed me Valka's saddle, the trappers must have thrown it in the water once they got them both into captivity. Astrid said as Jade gently put down Valka's saddle on the windowsill. Stoic walked up to it and stroked it sadly. Who was the person who took them hostage? Stoic demanded angrily as Jade sighed. The most evil dragon trapper in the world. Drago Bloodfist. She snarled as Hiccup, Brenna, and Kalia looked at each other in confusion. Darko Bloodfist. Kalia asked as Brenna shook her head. No, I think she said Draco Bloodfist. She said as Hiccup stepped in between them. Really? I heard Dargo Bloodfist. He said as Stoic dropped the saddle in shock, getting all of their attention. Drago Bloodfist. He snarled as they all raised an eyebrow. Who's Drago Bloodfist? Astrid asked nervously as Stoic sat down in shock. Valka was kidnapped by Drago. He asked Jade, who nodded sadly. I'm sorry about you mate. She apologized before looking over at Brenna. Oh, and Brenna. Yeah Jade. I saw Talon on one of the ships. He was being protected by Drago. She said as Brenna's eyes widened. Talon's alive. What do you mean Talon's alive? We have to go save him. Brenna screamed as she ran up to Jade, who was taken aback by her sudden change of attitude. The brunette then jumped out the window and onto the Nightmare's back. Come on. We need to go. Brenna. Calm down. Hiccup urged as he ran outside and grabbed her arm. Look, you want to go save Talon, we want to save my mom, but we need to think of a plan first. He can't just run in, dragons blazing. Well then what plan do you have? She questioned as everyone else walked outside, except for Toothless and Sky, who were inside and playing with Fireheart and Hearth. I don't know, maybe Burke's army could take them out. Jade, you said that Drago was making an army, right? Well maybe our army could take his. He suggested as Jade sighed and shook her head. No, not even the Burke army and my nest could take him. We would need at least one other tribe or nest. She said as Stoic looked down. Well. There aren't any other local tribes that would come to our aid. If berserkers find out we have dragons, they'll go to war with us. And then Alvin wouldn't help us if I kissed his boots. Stoic sighed as Astrid's head whipped towards Brenna. Your village, she muttered as Hiccup and Stoic looked at her hopefully. What, no? I can't go back there. If my parents find out I'm alive, then we can go save Valka and Talon, Astrid said as Kalia pulled Hiccup to the side. Who's Talon and Valka? She asked curiously. Valka is my mom and Talon is a former dragon hunter that Brenna had a crush on, but then we all thought he was killed. But apparently he isn't. Hiccup explained as Kalia scratched her head. Okay, then why can't Brenna's parents know she's alive? She questioned. Because she ran away and wants to stay low profile. Hiccup whispered as Kalia raised an eyebrow. She destroyed an entire army and wanted to stay low profile. She asked as Hiccup nodded before looking back over at Brenna, who was rubbing her arm. Please, you have to go convince your father to help us. Astrid begged as Brenna sighed. But Brenna, as chief of Berk, I order you to go get your father to help us. Stoic demanded as she gulped and gave her a nervously look, making him sigh. Okay. How about I fly out there and try and convince Bringer if he can help us? No. Brenna interrupted, I'll do it. Really? You're gonna come out of the shadows? Hiccup asked as she nodded. Yeah, I think it's about time my parents know I'm okay. She muttered with a small smile as Hiccup walked up and put a hand on her shoulder. Come on, the faster we can save them the better. He said as she shook her head. No, I need to go alone. She concluded as Hiccup nodded and stepped back. Sky. She called out as Sky perked up and nuzzled her hatchlings before running outside. Come on. We're going to get my parents to help us defeat Drago. What about my family? Sky asked as Brenna patted her nose. Don't worry, everyone else is staying on Berk, they'll be fine. She assured as Sky sighed before taking off. The nearly full moon hung high in the sky as Brenna shivered. Winter was fast approaching and the cold was biting this far up in the air, but they still marched onwards. Sky, unaffected by the cold, looked up at her shivering rider in pity and noticed that clouds were starting to gather below them. We should stop and rest for the night, she suggested as Brenna's teeth chattered and she rubbed her bare arms. She didn't expect it to be this cold out. Fine. She mumbled as Sky descended into the clouds and the wind started to pick up. Snow started to slowly fall and stick to Brenna's hair as they scanned the horizon for islands. There aren't any for a while heading south. Let's just head back north and try to stay at one of those smaller islands. Brenna yelled through the increasing wind as Sky squinted and roared in approval. Wow. The wind is really picking up. Sky yelled as she flew with the strong wind northbound. The wind slightly shifted northeast, instead of the northwest where they were heading. No. Brenna yelled as Sky roared and fought against the now snowstorm. Brenna gripped Sky's saddle with amazing strength as the night fury and rider whipped through the sky, trying to keep up with the whipping winds. Out of the corner of Brenna's eye, she noticed through the snow Berk zipping past. No. Berk. Sky. We need to land. Now. She screamed as Sky slowly started to descend. They soon reached the ocean and the waves started to get higher and higher, splashing the two with their freezing salt water, beckoning them into the Black Sea. Sky tried to lean up but the wind was too strong and kept them at the same, dangerously low altitude. One giant wave came up and crashed onto the two, knocking Brenna off of Sky's back into the ferocious ocean. Brenna. Sky screamed as she tried to wheel around, but another huge wave made her bright blue eyes turn to slits and it crashed over her, leading her into the freezing darkness. Underscore 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 underscore. Are all winters up here this bad? Kalia stuttered as she wrapped herself in a blanket and sat in front of the fire while Hiccup stared at the window and at the swirling snowstorm. Hey, just wait for devastating winter. Astrid muttered as Winter perked up from her corner of the room. What? She asked sleepy as Kalia shook her head. No, We're talking about the season, not you, she assured as Winter put her head back down. Something isn't right. Hiccup muttered as Astrid and Kalia looked up at him. What do you mean? Astrid questioned as Hiccup sighed. That snowstorm came so suddenly, too suddenly. And it started only a few hours after Brenner and Sky left. Bucket should have been able to warn us days in advance, but he didn't. He couldn't. Hiccup muttered as Toothless stretched and walked downstairs, the two hatchlings clinging to his side. Hey yawns did Sky and Brenner come back once the storm started? He asked as Astrid shook her head. Toothless' features were etched with worry. Well, they probably landed and are sleeping taking cover in a cave right now, she assured, but Toothless was wary to believe it. He knew his mate, and knew that she wouldn't put either of them in potential danger if she knew the storm was coming. She would fly back. We need to go out and look for them, Toothless concluded as Hiccup nodded in approval and walked over to the closet, finding gloves and a scarf. Hiccup, I don't think it's a good idea to go out in this weather. Those winds and snow will make it nearly impossible to navigate, Astrid reasoned as Kalia waved her off. Come on, don't be such a wet blanket, she said before Astrid shot her a glare and threw a bucket of melting snow on her, soaking her and the blanket. Hey, I'm just embracing my inner self, Astrid countered with a sly smirk before realizing Stormfly was back at her hut. I should probably get back to my place, Stormfly's probably wondering where I am. Bye guys. Bye Astrid, Hiccup said as Astrid waved and opened up the door. She eyed the swirling snow before taking a deep breath and trudging through, slamming the door behind her. You know, for a total bitch, she's kinda cute, Kalia said as Hiccup's head whipped around. Huh? He asked in shock as she nodded. Yeah, if you hadn't taken her, I'd probably make a move, she said casually as Hiccup's jaw dropped. Wait, why Urea? He trailed off as his face turned bright red. A normal human being. I thought all people were attracted to both genders. Or are you only into girls? She asked as Hiccup nodded. Yeah. Most people are only attracted to the opposite gender. How long have you been secluded from the rest of society? Hiccup questioned as Kalia shrugged. Well, I met Shock and was outcasted at the age of 5. I still remember flying away from the village, tears streaming down my face as the angry shouts grew quieter and quieter. And I have a few vague memories before that. She sighed as Hiccup put her hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, I'm sure that there's someone else who, likes girls, Hiccup said awkwardly as Kalia blushed and chuckled. Thanks, but apparently there aren't that many on Berk. Underscore 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 underscore. Brenner groaned as she was dragged out of the freezing ocean and onto the frozen dirt of the shore. She was only conscious enough to see a darkened light blur looming over her. The moon was still pretty much at its peak. Everything seemed eerily calm. The snowstorm vanished just as quick as it appeared. The figure knelt down and started giving her CPR. After about a minute or so, Brenner shot up and coughed up a bunch of seawater. Her vision became clear and she looked around the icy wasteland at the frozen grass and dirt. How was there no snow? She looked over and saw a woman with a nearly perfect face. The only off thing was the fact that she seemed to feel evil. Who are you? Brenner stuttered as she inched back, her fingers touching the freezing water lapping onto the shore. Where's my dragon? She was freezing. Although I do not know what happened to your dragon, don't worry, you're in good hands, the woman assured with a wicked smile. She held out her hand and a small flame appeared out of nowhere. Brenner gasped, but instantly began to feel better. She noticed a few necklaces around her neck and gasped, there were gems on the end of each one. No, she muttered as the woman's smile fell and eyes landed on the scales on Brenner's arm. Another gem, she muttered as Brenner's breath hitched. Saga. A large wave crashed onto an island, and Sky was thrown into the trash-covered shore. Her eyes snapped open and she yelped in pain. She shakily stood up and shook off, noticing that there was a cut where she fell onto a discarded sword. What happened here? She asked herself warily before walking towards the torched trees. Oh my gods. She silently walked through the ruined forest. Weapons, shields, and bones were scattered across the pale brown vegetation. Hello. She called out. This place was beyond creepy, and she felt as if someone was watching her. Is anyone here? A chilling breeze shook the charred trees. Okay, now Sky was really creeped out. She shook her head before raising her wings and attempting to take off, but as soon as she jumped into the air, a searing pain on her tail fin made her screech and smash into a few trees, which crumbled on impact. She groaned and turned to see the problem. There was a painfully obvious slash down the middle. It would heal, but she'd be stuck there for a while. Great. She mumbled sarcastically as she noticed a bit of movement in the distance. Hello. She roared before noticing the figure dash towards a hill and quickly dive below her line of sight. Sky raised an eyebrow before racing after it. Once at the top of the hill, she saw the ruins of a small town. She stared at the decaying, burned buildings in awe before seeing the figure dash into a crumbling house. Hey. She ran towards the home and carefully nudged open the weak door. At any little movement, the house could come falling down, and given her predicament, that would mean bad news for her. The figure then dashed up the staircase, Sky carefully darting after it. I'm not going to hurt you. Sky called out as the figure turned and rushed into a small room. Now she's cornered it. Hello. She asked gently once again. A dark figure hid in a shadow in the corner. A bit of light from the cloudy sky escaped through the giant hole in the wall. Leave me alone. It whispered in a gruff yet gentle tone, obviously female. Come out, I'm a friend. Sky assured as the figure growled and threw a rotted piece of wood at her. I said leave me alone. She growled, the last word muttered in Dragonese. What was she? I'm Skyscale of the Northern Night Fury Nest. Sky introduced, trying to get some information out of her. Nothing. I have a mate named Grayscale, but we all call him Toothless because of a name his rider gave him by accident. It's a bit of an inside joke between friends. Still no response, but Sky took note of the fact that the figure seemed to become more relaxed. My mate and I just had 2 hatchlings. I had a child. She mumbled as Sky perked up, with the love of my life. But they were both taken away from me and I was cursed. She hissed as Sky looked down sadly. Oh. I am so sorry. Sky muttered as the figure rose. Now Sky was sure it was a human, except something seemed off about her. She was wearing a hood that covered her face, her long dark brown hair came tumbling out, and long sleeves and pants with gloves, covering all her skin. Can I see your face? She asked carefully as the woman obviously started to stare at her hurt tail fin. You cannot run away, so why not? The woman said before taking a deep breath and standing up, the pale light casting a shadow over her hooded face. Sky gave her a confused look before the hood fell back, relieving a middle-aged woman's face, except little blotches of brown and purple scales covered around half of her face, along with one of her eyes having slits for pupils. Sky's eyes widened in shock at the sight. Why you're a halfling? She asked in a hushed shock. Halflings are the most cruel and brutal dragon killers who kill for fun, cursed to live a life not quite human, not quite dragon. Rejected by both human and dragon kind as a punishment. My husband thought that blast killed me. It was just the curse being put on me. When I awoke everyone was gone. She whispered solemnly as Sky awkwardly inched towards her. I'm so sorry. But you had to face some kind of punishment for actions. Sky said as she put a wing around the halfling, who started weeping softly. I understand what I did was wrong now. If I could take it all back I would. She whimpered as Sky gave her a sympathetic look. Name's Hellevi. My husband used to mess around with me, calling me hell because I made his life hell. He stopped that the second I gave birth to Vali. She whispered as Sky looked down. Was that your baby's name? A small nod from Hellevi indicated yes. You know. The island I live on now is full of accepting humans and dragons. Once my tail is healed then I bet they wouldn't mind if I brought you back. And if they do then I'll plasma blast them so hard their grandkids will feel it. She assured as Hellevi gave her a light chuckle. Thank you, but I think I'm better off by myself. She said as Sky nodded. I understand. She said before jumping out the hole in the wall and running into the charred forest. Halevi stared after her before sighing and putting her hand on a burned cradle. She squeezed her eyes shut before running out of the forest and in the direction Sky went. Hey! Wait! Underscore 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 underscore. I am going to ask you one more time. Saga snarled as she covered her hand in ice and whipped around to face Brenna. Her hands were tied behind her back and her face was bruised and burned. The once painfully obvious scar that Stoic gave her was now almost unnoticeable. Where is the gem? Brenna's eyes widened as she noticed Saga's hand, but she still shook her head stubbornly. Never. She hissed as Saga's fist slammed into her jaw. Her shriek pierced through the quiet tundra as a wicked smile formed on Saga's face. A large gash now sat on Brenna's cheek. Tears streamed down her face, but she bit her lip and stared at her captor defiantly. You will never get those gems. Brenna snarled as Saga let out a wicked laugh. Ha ha, yes, she kicked Brenna in the stomach, who fell forwards and groaned in pain. Saga grabbed one of Brenna's braids and yanked her up by the hair. Will. She blew a puff of fire at Brenna's hair, burning off most of the braids. Brenna yelped as Saga held the braids in one hand. It's a shame. These were quite beautiful. She tossed them into the ocean like they were garbage before turning back to Brenna. Her now shoulder-length hair fell over her rage-stricken features. Ooh, is someone upset I ruined her pretty hair? Saga sneered as Brenna's fists tightened in anger. Get away from me. Brenna snarled in Dragonese, catching Saga completely off guard. Ooh, someone's feisty. She jeered as Brenna continued her harsh glare. My friends will find me. And when they do you'd be lucky to still be able to walk. She hissed as Saga laughed, but it quickly turned to an inquisitive look, completely throwing Brenna off. You care about your friends, don't you? Saga questioned as Brenna gave her a strange look. Yes. She answered carefully, not taking her eyes off the witch. Do you know what this gem can do? She asked, holding up a dark purple jewel. No. Brenna said, her short hair fluttering in the wind. It allows me to become any dragon. Or human. She answered with a wide grin as Brenna's eyes widened. No. Don't you dare. She muttered, as Saga squeezed the gem. No. Saga's pale skin started to take on a darker, tan color. Her jet black hair lightened and took on a warmer, brown tone. Her teal eyes lost their saturation and gained a bit of a warmer tone. Brenna watched in stunned horror as Saga slowly but surely became, well, her. Well, I really must be going. You said you lived on Berk, yes? Saga questioned with an evil smile, making Brenna glare at her. Brenna's eyes became draconic and her fingernails turned to claws. Even though she didn't have the gem on anymore, the power was still within her. No you don't. She snarled before ripping her hands out of the ropes and tackling Saga. She screamed before throwing Brenna off. She was snarling and sucking in incredibly deep breaths. Oh, that's adorable. You gain a butt of inhuman strength and think you can stop me. Saga sneered before growing a pair of wings and taking off. Well, I don't think I got off too bad. Brenna whispered to herself before opening up her palm, revealing a sky blue gem. She held it up to her eye and looked at it in curiosity. Okay friend, what powers do you possess? She questioned before closing her fist around it and squeezing. Nothing happened. Oh come on. She barked in annoyance before squeezing it again, except this time a lot harder. Behind her, a giant wave rose and crashed the second Brenna let go, splashing her with cold salt water. She turned around and looked at the ocean in confusion before squeezing the gem again, causing the same thing to happen. Whoa. She trailed off in wonder. Brenna put the gem in her pocket before taking a deep breath and waving her hand, causing a small stream of water and fly up into the air and fall into the calm ocean with a asterisk plop asterisk. Brenna smiled to herself before realization crashed on her like a wave. See what I did there? XD. Sky. She screamed in alarm. She'd completely forgotten about her lost dragon, first Sky, then Berk. Saga can't do that much damage in such a short time, right? she muttered to herself before freezing a small portion of the water and hopping on and speeding off towards the nearest islands. The end.